All right, this is going to be an introduction to speed painting, which is a different method of digital painting. Instead of getting started with your photo and then sketching it, understanding the basic shapes, and then building up local colors on top of your sketch, and then building in some duotone color and darker colors, and refining it from there, and that's where we had it last class. That method is based on sketching and layout. And so I'm going to group those all together on their own as one example of digital painting. I'm going to call it the sketch/layout method. But we're going to look at a second method now. So I'll put all of these layers into a group and just hide that for the time being. And we're going to start over with a new layer. And we're going to call this speed painting, which is basically just like you would set up a canvas to paint on very quickly without any drawing. So I have my reference image open in Photoshop along with my painting image, and I first have to arrange them to be side by side. So I'm going to say, move this one over here, window arrange, and then 2 up vertical. But depending on how much reference you have, you can kind of use these different preset methods. You want to have your painting surface as large as possible. So I'm going to kind of squeeze this out because I don't need too much of that. All right, I can even kind of move it around the way I want. The other thing I want, besides my swatches maybe, is the navigator. So I'm going to go to Window and turn on Navigator. And what's nice about the navigator, and I can make it a little bit bigger, is it will show me my image from a distance, so I don't get stuck only ever looking at details. It's also a really handy way to kind of zoom in on my image and move around it. So you'll see how that works. Okay, so speed painting works, first of all, by being its own layer, but behind it you want to have a middle gray background. So you're going to fill that in. If I was making a new one, I would simply say, new layer, edit, fill, 50% gray, normal mode 100%. And the reason you want to start with middle gray is because you want to be able to build up colors that are first darker than the middle gray and then lighter than the middle gray. If you just build up on white, everything's going to look too dark and you don't build up good values. The other thing that's helpful for speed painting is knowing your brushes. So we're going to talk a little bit about brushes now. The most basic brush that I use is this middle setting. Either a hard brush or a soft brush that's pressure sensitive to size. So if I'm using a tablet, that allows me to push very lightly and I don't fill it all in, or I push hard and I fill it all in. That's a soft brush. If I use the hard edge brush, same thing, but with a very distinct hard edge. You also want to be aware of your opacity, and I like to paint with a slightly low opacity, like maybe about 70% when I'm doing speed paintings, sometimes even 50%. So the more I paint, the darker it gets. Right, but there's a lot more options for your brushes. You can use one of these preset brushes in Photoshop that are meant to imitate bristle brushes or various brush types. But you'll notice that they take the hardness setting away when you use these. So you're not able to get a soft brush like this, but you can still play with opacity. And depending on how you're using it and what kind of tablet you have, they'll change versus the pressure you use and the tilt of your tablet, of your stylus. But how do you customize these brushes? Because I actually don't like these bristle brushes all that much. I tend to like using my own brushes, making my own. And they'll look something like this. They're kind of a weird shape that I make, and I can show you how to make it. Right? So, we're going to quickly make our own brush. So say new, and we're just going to call this your name and then brush, preset. Doesn't even matter how big it is, but it should be pretty small. So let's make it like 400 by 400 not inches, but pixels. And it doesn't matter what resolution, but it should be just kind of a square. And now we're just going to use black ink, and I'm going to paint with a brush. Doesn't matter what. But I'm going to make kind of a messy puddle. Maybe with some soft edges, because that's what I like. Right? It's a little bit darker in the middle. It's a little bit softer at the edges. And then I'm going to swap. I'm even going to put some lights in there. So it's kind of like a sponge painting brush. Now, as long as you work in just black and white, I can turn that into my brush. So now I go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. I'm going to call it Carl Brush Preset. OK. And now, in my brushes, at the very end, I have this brush. And at 23% opacity, that's what it looks like. At 100% opacity, it looks like this. Exactly what I designed, right? But that's not all. I can change the size of it. Ooh, so now it's a smaller brush. Ooh, that's a nice brush. That's going to be useful. But what if I want it to do some other things? So I can play with its size and its opacity, but now let's play with our brush settings. And you actually have them in Photoshop right here under brush settings. But if you don't see it, go to Window, go to Brush, and you'll see it. Okay? Now with brush settings, I have my brush selected. The first thing I want to play with is shape dynamics. And this is where I can decide, okay, how does it move from thick to thin with pin pressure? And I can set it linked to pin pressure. And this to me is the most important thing to set. But instead of having it be perfectly clean as I move through thick to thin, I can put in a size jitter, which is very important for mimicking a real brush. So it's not always so clean. I can also change its angle a little bit, because when you use a brush, you're not always using it at the exact same angle. You're letting it rotate as you use it. So right now this looks very much like a stick of charcoal, which will be great for what I'm going to show you with the speed painting. Okay, then there's other things we can play with. You can play with scattering, especially if you want it to be even more kind of messed with and more like airbrushing. And you can turn these things on and off. You can also play with color dynamics and actually build in a mix of colors between your foreground and background color. So you see how it's mixing in the white, but it would mix in whatever color I put in the background. And actually I love that. That's a really nice thing to play with. But it will make it a little unclear for you, so I'm going to turn that off for now. Okay, so now I have my brush. Now I'm going to go back to my original. And I can always play with that brush some more. Because I'm at a higher resolution image, I want to make my brush quite a bit bigger for this speed painting. And I'm just going to do it in blacks and grays. So I'm just going to play with the opacity. I'm going to select it all. And now I'm just going to start painting. First thing I want to do, put in my shadows. Scrubbing it in. You always want to establish a darkest dark pretty early on. And so the darkest darks for him is going to be in the shadows of his hair. Those are the biggest, darkest darks. And then he has his eyes. And of course, he has his glasses. But I don't need to worry about detail yet. I just want to kind of fill in all the big shadows. And I'm keeping it in black and white so I can show you another little trick. But you could also do this with color. And I usually do it with color. But it's worth knowing this trick. I'm going to take out the microphone and just do a regular collar and skinny tie. Okay, so I'm letting the grays come through. But then my next type of speed painting, I'm not even going to make it on a different layer, is I'm just going to switch to a lighter value. And I'm going to start putting in some of the highlights. And it's important to work on both sides of the gray. Do his ears. And it's okay to make lots of mistakes because you're building your lights on top of your darks. And you try to have a lot of energy. It's like a gesture drawing. A lot of energy going all the way through. I'm going to take my opacity down a little bit more so I can build it with a little bit more subtlety now. But I'm still using a big, pretty, chunky brush. It gives me a lot of variety. And you work from general to specific. And the lighter I press, the smaller area I can hit. It's a really good way to practice your painting and your drawing. So right now, just keeping it in grays, it's a nice value drawing. Realize that you are limited by your reference. Because I don't have his chin, I have to just kind of make it up. It'd be good to have more reference to get that. And as I cut out his glasses, then I'll need to go back in and establish more of his eye. Right? The shadows in his hair. So it's a very different way of starting a painting. And you're always tempted to go in and fix details right away, but you want to keep it loose and general as long as possible to not waste time. Put in the shirt. All right, so now I could go in and I could shrink my brush a little bit. And I can make it a higher opacity. And I can use my navigator to kind of see what it looks like from a distance and then think, okay, I want to work on this part of the eye because that's too opaque. This part of the eye because the glasses need to separate from the eyebrow better here. So I go in, I clean that up, and I might soften the eyebrow. Okay? Remember, you can also steal colors from yourself. So you don't always have to paint with just white and black. Even in doing a value study, you can start painting with your different values. And so I might go to a higher opacity now, but choose my values more carefully. This way I might be able to show the eye in the way I want. And you can see it from a distance here, and you can see it up close here. It's a nice way to set up your work. And it gives you a very hand-done feel, even with just a very simple brush. The detail on the horn rim glasses. You're always just playing with edge control, hard and sharpen. Shapes.